Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are going to be working on a sewing project. I don't know what the theme of this one is. This is one that I've had in my pile well over a year that I keep meaning to make up and I've just never gotten around to, and I'm not really sure what I wanted to actually sew this weekend. I couldn't make a good decision and I wanted something just kind of easy. So I picked this dress and this project that I've had for a long time. This is just a dress that has all these pleats. It's like a lot of box pleats on the butt, which I think will look really good on me. Darted fit bodice is a style with a shawl collar and a button trim, which aligns with the center front seam. The skirt features panels in the front and a cluster of 4 soft pleats in the back. A self or purchase belt may be used, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to do the short sleeves. I don't like a 3/4 inch length on me, so I'm going to do that shorter length. We'll see. I think I might be about to make a fabric faux pas, so let's talk about it. This is the fabric I'm using, which is this very drapey and loosely structured cotton, which I'm hoping will be okay. This is a dress that calls for rayon and more like a rayon challis or a crepe or something like that, so I'm hoping. It says linen too though, so and a chambray, so I think this will be an okay choice for this. I think it will be drapey enough, and this is just a fabric that I picked up at some point. I think I thrifted this actually. I think this was only a few dollars. Now that I'm looking at it, I want to say I thrifted this for $5 and I have 4 yards of it. And yeah, it's a really nice soft drapey cotton with these flowers and with the buttons in the front of this guy. Whoop. I think they'll just be really, really cute together because I have some really fun buttons picked out for this as well. When in doubt and not quite sure what I want to do for my sewing project, I think it's good to lean on something that's been in my pile for a long time that I just haven't gotten around to, because in general I kind of saw this as not exciting enough to do on camera, but it's okay if I do a simpler project on camera. There's no shame in that. So I'm going to be doing this even though I would consider it a simpler project. However, with it being simpler, is actually a few things that I'm afraid of in this, because bodice feel good about, collar I feel good about. All those buttons sometimes makes me a little nervous, but in general I've had good results with that. But it's those pleats on the back that I am nervous about, because I just am not a very skilled pleater. Pleating is something I've always struggled with. So I think that will be a good stretch for this of what otherwise will be probably a pretty easy and straightforward project. Seam finishes on this guy. We're gonna pink it. And this pattern is a size 14. So I'm gonna need to make the waist about 2 inches bigger, which is no big deal. I'll just add a 1/2 inch to each side seam. That's usually what I do with these. And I did realize with the back pleats on this, I don't want the zipper in the back, so I am gonna have to do a side zipper, which hopefully will be okay. Today I am going over to my friend's place and helping them move, and then after I do that, I will come back here and cut this out, and then I will have tomorrow to make the dress. And if I can't finish it by tomorrow, in a few weekends, I have another gap that hopefully I'll be able to finish dress on. I'm traveling quite a bit right now. I'm in a every other weekend being gone bout of travel. So I think that's also causing me to feel less motivated to feel like sewing, because I kind of feel scatterbrained. This is too much travel for me in a short period of time, but it's okay. I'm sure I'm gonna have fun, and you're gonna see all the videos of hopefully me having fun. So with that, we're gonna now hop in to me cutting out the fabric. The cutting out process of this project is pretty straightforward. All I'm doing here is adding an extra 1/2 inch to the side to just give me a little bit more wiggle room in the waistline, which I'm just doing using, I have these magnets that are each 1/4 inch. So I put them on my scissors and I use those to cut out the edges that I know need to be a little bit bigger. I've decided not to move the zipper on this, as well as not really make any other alterations, so this is really truly a straightforward cutting out. And as always, this is your reminder that I do have a Patreon where you can go over and support my channel for about $5 a month. I give you access to videos about 5 days early, so on a Monday instead of a Friday, and I always really appreciate the support I get over there. The only special note for this project is I've been trying to remember to construct things slightly differently, where the last thing I'll sew up is the side seam. That way, in the event of weight fluctuations and different things like that, I can more easily just take in and out the side seams to fit my body. This is hopefully part of me having a more long life wardrobe, and sewing your side seams all at once at the end really makes that a lot easier. Although this time I'm putting a zipper in, so I kind of self-defeated here, but it was worth a shot, and I'm glad I tried this construction method, but you will see me doing things in a slightly bizarre order as a result. And then here I am putting on the interfacing. I cut out the interfacing for these pieces. It was just big enough that I didn't want to use my interface roll. And then I'm just going to iron that on. I will say I forgot that because I thrifted this and I hadn't fabric content checked it. This does have a little bit of polyester, so I did have to watch the temperature of my iron a lot more than obviously if it was normal. And then it is dart time. There is a lot of darts to be had on this project. I have 2 side darts, which is actually one of my preferred methods for a bust dart. I think it looks really good on me. And then I also have 2 darts in the neckline on the back, as well as 2 darts on the back just in general. And there's also this really interesting tiny dart in the collar. This is going to help the collar like go open and fold open the way it is supposed to look. But it was just a really interesting placement from a dart that I don't think I've ever experienced before. But once I have all my darts marked, I am of course going to pin everything together. And to start this project, I don't have any gray bobbins, so I'm going to quickly wind a bobbin. And with all that prep work done, I am now finally sewing. I'm just sewing my darts here, starting at the base where I'll actually backstitch, and then going to the edge of the dart where I'll just sew off the edge and tie those off later. And then I'm going to iron those all flat. It's really important to iron fabric as you go. It makes a huge difference in your sewing. And I do need to sew together both the front seam of the blouse here, which is what I am pinning, and then I will also seam together. It's like the shawl part of the shawl collar. It's the center back, which is going to attach really interestingly in a few seconds. But here, as you can see me press these open, you can see I am pinking for my seam finish this time. If you know me, you know often on this channel I do skip the stay stitching, but here I needed to cut the fabric down to a stay stitch line on the back neck, so that way I can actually ease the collar properly. So I did actually do that here. In here, I have sewn the shoulders together because I will need that as well for my next step. And here I am pinning that kind of like back collar area to the back collar itself. This is all one piece, super interesting. And the reason this is able to be all one piece the way it is because of that dart that you added. And yeah, I don't know, this whole thing was kind of fascinating actually. And I'm doing my best to show you what is just a very fiddly and weird area, but here I'm actually ironing that. I'm ironing all the seam allowance up because that will eventually be covered by the facing. And from here I'm working on the facing, starting by clipping the corners and pressing up what will finally be sewn down at the end of the back neck right here. It's easier to press this before you sew anything. And then I'm also going to need to sew together. There's just like 1 inch or so down at the bottom that will complete the facing. So it's like a complete round finished collar place you can put your head through, which you can see the shape of better when I iron it here. And then here I'm just going around and like top stitching the edge. This is going to be my finished edge for the facing. So we're just rolling it over once, calling it good, sewing that down. And now I'm pinning it to the bodice here, just matching all like notches and edges and things like that, and the clipped corners and stuff like that. This is a really challenging pinning, and it did take a little bit of easing in certain spots, but it's one of those things that you just kind of have to like trust the process on and be really, really wary of making accidental tiny pleats. And then once I get that sewn, I am now turning it and just trying to give it a really, really good press. These collars always make me kind of nervous. I feel like I maybe had an early project with something like this that didn't turn out great, so I was being as precise as I could on this project. And I think to make the front turn a little bit, they have you put like this random 1.5 inch about bit of stitching right around the collar, and yeah, I think it helps the collar just turn out and look nicer, although again, this is all me trusting the process because I don't really know what I'm doing here. And then the instructions said to baste to the edge of the collar. I normally will skip this when it is recommended, but because this has just that little bit of synthetic in it, I decided to go ahead and do this because keeping that press can be a little bit harder when you're working with the synthetic. And then here I am going to start turning my attention to the sleeves. I'm really just trying to procrastinate the skirt at this point. The most logical next step would be the skirt, but here I am just pinning together the sleeve seams. I've already cut these actually a little bit shorter because I could already tell from the get-go that I was going to want shorter sleeves that had just like a little bit of an angle. That's how I prefer things to look on me. And while this angle is strange, the process I'm doing is very straightforward. First thing I'm doing here is just doing, again, that turned edge at the hem of the sleeve. And then with a slightly improved angle, you can see me putting in the basting stitches for the sleeve head. I am just putting in 2 lines of stitches. I've already decided that because of the alterations I made to this sleeve, it's going to be probably not a perfectly eased sleeve. So I've decided from the get-go that I'm just gonna live with that. And then here I'm prepping some hand sewing by pinning the hem up after ironing it on the sleeve. And then I'm looking for things to do, but not ready to commit to hand sewing yet. So I sewed together the front seam of the skirt. And here you see me doing the pinking here. And to further procrastinate, I'm also cutting some bias binding that I will eventually bind the sleeves in. All right, it is time for media on my mind. This is where I talk about books, TV shows, movies, whatever it is I'm indulging in at the moment. While I do some hand sewing, here I am doing some hemming of the sleeves, and then I'm going to tack down some facings in the bodice. So I have been reading like crazy lately, partially because I've been traveling, but I've also just been enjoying reading again lately. And I am excited. I got approved for the affiliate program with Bookshop, so you're now going to be directed to Bookshop links when I link down below, which is super exciting because it's not Amazon. And you choose your local bookstore on Bookshop, and it will actually give some proceeds of the book that you buy to your local bookshop, which is really exciting. And they have all the different book media types, so I'm pretty excited about that. And now we'll have those linked down below. Full disclaimers, through affiliate links I get 10%, which is also a lot higher than Amazon. Amazon I was lucky to get like 2, so really excited to be working with Bookshop instead. First book I read recently, which has now been maybe 3 weeks, and I've read like 8 books since, so I don't know how well I remember it. Oh gosh, I hate this thread. This is some cheaper thread that I bought a long time ago, but it's the only gray thread I have, and God, it's awful. So I read Valley of the Dolls, which is, I think it's from the 60s, and it's written for the 40s. It's an interesting book about like just several different women points of view, which I wasn't sure about because the first portion of the book I think just comes from one perspective, but it follows a lot of like beautiful and famous women through Hollywood and TV and all those times, and involves drugs and sex, and it was an interesting book to read. Lots of problematic views in there, of course, because it was written so long ago, but it did investigate some really interesting things. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's like the best book I've ever read, but I also don't feel like I read the best book I've ever read that often. I thought it was worth a read. I thought it was interesting. It was definitely one of those, I don't know if it's because it took place in like glam Hollywood, but it was a book that I had a really good, like easy time envisioning everything. And I think it's probably because it took place in a space that I'm really, really familiar with, but I really enjoyed it. If you're looking for kind of like a long read, I do recommend it. As always, check some trigger warnings and make sure it's not something that will trigger you. But yeah, I've been on quite the reading streak. After that, I read 4 books that like kind of center around, I would say, like feminine rage and feminine revenge. I would say like varying genres from like thriller to like dark comedy as well as horror. I think I've concluded I'm not super into horror. I think it just really varies. The 4 books that I read, the first one was They Never Learn. This was my favorite of the 4 like feminine rage books I read. I would say it's like mostly a thriller. You could say there's minor horror, but I would put it firmly in like the thriller category. And I enjoyed, there was parallel storytelling that I enjoyed and some time stuff. And I try to also not give tons of spoilers when I talk about these books, but I really enjoyed this book, and this book like just had a lot of themes that really appealed to me. And then my second favorite of this list was Confessions. I would put Confessions into probably starting to go into horror. This one also had a bunch of different like narratives and viewpoints and things, and it took place in Japan, and it was just a really, really interesting read. I don't feel like I really saw the twists coming, which is not something I can always say about books. Most of the time I find books pretty predictable, so it was enjoyable to be slightly surprised. I didn't really know where anything was going. Very disturbing book. All 4 of these books are pretty disturbing. I would say feminine rage and feminine revenge is a generally like fairly disturbing topic, but it was just something I kind of needed right now to read a bunch of. My, I guess, third favorite, or least favorite, or wherever we're at if we're ranking out of 4, was You'd Look Better as a Ghost. This I would put into like a dark comedy kind of space. It was interesting. The narrative was interesting. Everything about it was fairly interesting. I found the end to be disappointing. I don't know. It was just like an okay book. Like, I don't know that I would actually recommend this one. I just would say it wasn't my fave. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just because it's not my favorite doesn't mean it's bad. It just, the tone of it was kind of hard to read. This was one that I was having a hard time getting past the first few chapters, and I don't know that it was really worth pushing through those first few chapters. Sorry, now I have to find where I put my scissors. There they are. My least favorite, and this is just a genre issue for me and like a gore and graphic issue for me. I actually thought the plot and everything about the book was actually arguably the most interesting of the ones I read. I guess I've just become squeamish. It's funny how like life just kind of changes and things that don't bother you all of a sudden bother you. But it was Mayfly, which was, yeah, it was firmly, I would put this firmly in the horror category. It was pretty graphic, but I really enjoyed the settings, the writing, the characters. Like I enjoyed everything about the book. I thought the ending was like the right ending. It wasn't the ending that I wanted, but I think it was the correct ending for this type of book. And I would read this author's work again, because one of the things that I do when I have a book that's pretty squeamish, for me, I'll just skip a lot of the parts that make me feel a little squeamish because you generally know what's happening in them. And yeah, it's pretty nasty is what I would say. The parts that made me squeamish, I would say were like pretty gross. So just look for those content warnings to check if this is something you're actually interested in reading. But I loved, it was set in LA as like a Disney princess performer. Like it was a really interesting read. I liked it, but I didn't like it. It's that the parts that I liked, I really liked, and the parts that I didn't like, I really didn't like. But I'm glad I read it, and I think it's always good to try new types of media and things like that. So those are the 4 feminine rage books that I read. And then after that, I didn't reread The Hunger Games because I can't find my book set, which tells me it's at my parents' house, so I need them to ship it to me potentially. But I did rewatch all the Hunger Games movies, and then I read the new Hunger Games book, which was so sad. I don't know if it's the saddest of them, but it's really sad and it's really hard to read. But I think more than ever, Hunger Games is an important franchise to read. I think Suzanne Collins is just really good at breaking down very nuanced, complicated topics and theories and things like that for younger audiences. And that one I bought actually through Bookshop. The other ones I all used Libby. I read most of my books via Libby through my library. I read so quickly. I don't feel like I could buy all the books that I read, and I love supporting my local library. And while I actually don't enjoy an e-book, my real preference in book reading is a physical book. The convenience of Libby coupled with when you hold a book with your hand, it just puts so much strain on my wrists and stuff that it can aggravate other parts of my condition. And an ebook is just a lot more like accessible for me hand-wise and hurts less to read. So I've gotten to the point that I would say like 95% of the books I'm reading are ebooks, and then out of those books, like 80% are Libby. I always really enjoy the Hunger Games franchise. I always cry a lot when I read Hunger Games, even though I know what's gonna happen, right? Like when you read the new book, like you know everyone's gonna die, because that is just kind of how Hunger Games works. But that doesn't make it any less devastating. I did really enjoy it, and if you are a fan of the Hunger Games, it did not disappoint. And then I watched all the movies. I did that via Fandango. They had like a bundle package where you could buy all movies for like $20. I actually think the movies were pretty well done. Of course, for me, nothing will ever beat a book, but I do truly really enjoy those movies. And then yes, I would like to get my hands back on my books, but I don't think that'll happen till like September. And then the last book, I then was on a kick of reading apocalyptic books, young adult books, which led me to, I think it's Agnes at the End of the World, which I just finished, I think like a couple nights ago, last night. I don't know, time isn't real. I really, really enjoyed that book. It was also kind of stressful to read. I think I need to not read apocalyptic fiction for a second, which isn't going to work because I am reading the Ugly series right now. But once I'm done with the Ugly series, I'm going to go back to reading some fantasy and non-apocalyptic books, because I have to say, I love apocalyptic, like kind of hero books, for lack of a better term, and I always have. But right now, it's a little bit too dark and a little bit too real in some cases. But I really loved Agnes at the End of the World, and I would really recommend it. I would say it's like fairly akin to Hunger Games in genre. It was just a hard read because like it's about the world ending. Like Hunger Games firmly feels like, I know Hunger Games is based off of America and all that, but like Hunger Games feels pretty far away. I will say Agnes at the End of the World feels a lot more close to what the world actually feels like right now and what it might feel like if something terrible was going to happen. I need to, probably for my own mental health. It's at the end of these books in the Hunger Games and things like that. Oh, which reminds me of one of the things I was going to talk about the Hunger Games. But what reminds me is like all these books end in good winning. And so the ending always kind of brings you back around to hope. But the middle of the books are just so rough sometimes that, yeah, I think I need to get out of this headspace. But what I was going to say about Hunger Games and about the new Hunger Game book is I feel like it was released at a really good time because it covers Haymitch's games, and one of the primary themes of the book, I think, is that it takes a long time for revolution to actually happen, and it takes just kind of the right amount of circumstances and things like that. And it takes people from generation to generation to generation, which I think the Hunger Games series just in general covers really well. It takes generations to get somewhere where you would like it to be, and things and change is not always quick when it's in the positive direction. And I think that's something that's really important to hear right now, because I feel like a lot of people just want things to like instantly get better, and that's just like not how it works. I think the new Hunger Game book explores that really, really well. That's something that could be really explored right now in general. And like, I guess it's at the Hunger Games, like the whole 5-book now arc just clearly, like, for me is exactly describes why I have hope. Is I might not get to see the day that the world is the way I believe it could be, but the actions that we're taking as communities today are going to be what builds that future tomorrow for other generations. And I think that's a really important lesson right now, and it's really important to just think in those kind of like big terms. Back to Agnes at the End of the World. I really enjoyed this one because it had some cult and kind of fundamentalist cult stuff in it that I always enjoy reading about. To be clear, I was not a part of a cult. I did not grow up a cult, but I did grow up in the evangelical church, and a lot of really harmful things happened to me because of religion. And this book kind of explored that, and it also explored, I feel like it helped to explore some ideas of like spirituality outside of religion, and I just thought it was a good book. I thought all the characters were dynamic. I liked the book. I would recommend the book. However, I will say, yeah, there were parts of the book that was like, ugh, this now makes me think about like what that means in this world that we currently live in. So that wasn't my favorite because, like I said, Hunger Games feels like more in the future or just a little bit more distance, and I will say Agnes at the End of the World feels a little bit closer to society today. And like in general, I feel okay reading Uglies, the Uglies series, trilogy, whatever right now, because it also feels like not this world, even though it's a post-apocalyptic storytelling thing. Those are all the books I'm reading. Movies I've been watching, I haven't really started up any new TV shows that I haven't talked about or started any new podcasts. So that's it for now. As if it's not like a bajillion books. I have to say I've been really enjoying getting back into reading. I think my next goal is to read some fantasy stuff again. So, you know, drop your favorite fantasy, especially your queer fantasy recs down below. I have tons of book recommendations from you guys. I keep them all on a list. So I have plenty to choose from right now, but I will always take more recommendations because I'm a voracious reader when I'm reading. Yeah, but that basically wraps up all the different things that I am reading and watching, and we will now continue on this process. I have to finish one more sleeve, which I'll do off camera, and then I think we'll be good to go. And then here I'm continuing to sew. I am doing the center back seam of the skirt, and then there are 2 additional panels on the side, so it will be a total of 4 panels here. And then I got too excited and did my first pleat off camera, but now I'm basting around that pleat. It's almost like basting in a zipper, sort of, where I have like each side of the pleat kind of covering up a seam. So I could have definitely switched the zipper to the back if I had had more foresight, but that's okay. And here you can see me working on that second pleat. So that first pleat, you kind of like stitch down the line all the way around again, kind of like a zipper. The second pleat, I'm just going to stitch at the top because the goal of this pleat is to be slightly more open than the pleat underneath. These pleats were actually shockingly straightforward. I think I don't give myself enough credit for being pretty decent at pleats these days. And then my step after that is to figure out the pocket. Here I am putting the pocket on each side of the corresponding front and back skirt. Just pinning it here, and then I'll stitch it at 3/8, and then I'll press it open. And then I'll stitch the whole thing together. And again, the sides here are still open, but I am now pinning the back skirt to the back bodice and the front skirt to the front bodice, and also those next. And for the side with the zipper, I basted some of that, and now I am going to pick that open to install the zipper itself. And I completely finished the one side with the zipper because then you can press it and open it and have just a little bit more leeway before then closing the other side seam with the pocket. This was all really straightforward and pretty easy, and this order of operations makes things a little bit more confusing, but again, I think it'll be easier to let in and out this dress, which is the main advantage of this. And then we're getting to the point in the day that I get so much sun coming in the window, so I am about to stop, but here you can see me easing in that sleeve head, and then I'm going to sew that off camera real quick. It is the next day. The sleeve has mostly been sewn. The dress has been tried on. I know all the final things I need to do. And the first order of that is to real quick bind the sleeve. I like to bind my sleeves because I sometimes find the loose threads you can get from pinking itchy in the armpits, and a bias binding doesn't have that happen. So that is what I'm starting here, just sewing the bias binding with, I suppose, right sides together, and then I'll fold it over again twice and it will give me this beautiful edge that you see here. And my sleeves will be bound. The other thing this does is if I jerk my arm too suddenly and start a rip in the sleeve, I have 3 extra lines of defensive stitching, or 2, from the bias binding, and I find that to be pretty good for me because sometimes I can just be a little flaily, I guess. And after trying on the skirt, I needed to shorten it about 5 inches. Ideally, I would have shortened this before I ever sewed it, or even before I cut it, but I couldn't quite figure out how to shorten the pattern for this. And the reason you shorten things before you cut them out is that 2.5 inches that I'm cutting off the bottom, because I'm going to cut 2.5 off and then I'm going to fold it up 2.5 inches. But the reason you want to do it before is because this is something I learned later in sewing that nobody ever explained to me. Because these pieces are kind of like triangle shape, the bottom is a longer length, like around, like it's a longer circumference, and the higher you trim it then, the more circumference and like flowiness you lose. And that was just something I had no idea when I started sewing was a thing. And so by then trimming this off at the bottom, you'll lose a certain amount of like skirt volume. This doesn't matter for something as much like a 1940s, but when you're making a 1950s dress, if you have to shorten it like 5 inches, you actually lose a huge amount of circumference off the bottom of the skirt. And then of course, after I marked this, I did cut it, which is what you have also been seeing. But yeah, I thought it would hopefully be helpful to explain why you shorten the pattern piece ideally before you actually make the dress. I would have kept a little bit more flowiness in the skirt here if I had done it that way. And for the hem, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm first turning over again by 1 to finish my raw edge here. And then I'm coming back on top, and I am putting in some basting stitches so I can eventually ease the hem in. I somehow didn't get footage of me actually ironing this, even though I swear I took some. But what I'll do is I'll use these gathering stitches to like ease in the skirt when I fold it up that 2.5 inches, because again, your circumference at the very edge of your hem is bigger in measurement than your circumference of where you're actually folding it up. So you need to ease in that difference of like a few inches, and that is where these stitches come in handy. You can check out other videos and try to track down when I've shown this. I meant to show you the whole process, but that just didn't happen apparently on this go. And then I am just going to hem the skirt, doing a slip stitch, grabbing just the tiniest bit on the front side of the fabric. And even though non-functioning buttons are kind of one of my pet peeves, since it is part of this pattern, and I do think that is really cute and is one of the reasons I chose this pattern, I am now sewing on those non-functional buttons. And then my very last step is going to be pulling out the basting stitches on the pleating. This is on that like back butt pleat. And I'm also going to be pulling out those stitches around the shawl collar that I put in by hand earlier. And I'm really glad I did these. I definitely think they helped preserve the nice press I had gotten on each of these. Or not press on this, because this is a soft pleat, and a soft pleat doesn't mean you press. But it kept my pleats looking a lot nicer than if I had not done this. But with that, we're all ready for the reveal, and I can't wait to show you this dress. Alrighty, you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I went out to one of my extra special spots. I feel like right now I'm working on some kind of more simple day dresses to be using these extra special spots, but that's okay. I'm like not in such a gown mood right now and I don't have time to make gowns. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. As usual, we're going cost breakdown. Then we're talking about the final project. And lastly, I will give you hope helps. So starting out with my budget. So overall, this was a pretty affordable project. The fabric was $6.60 because I picked it up at the thrift. The notions were $8.51, which is actually the most expensive thing here. And that's because it was just a lot of buttons, zippers, like everything added up over time. And the pattern was only $8. I picked up the pattern, I think more like an antique mall or something like that, which means it's usually a little bit cheaper. So that brings me to a supply total of $23.11, which I think is fantastic value for a dress. At $23.11, sewing can be pretty affordable, right? I often showcase on my channel not very affordable sewing because I spend a lot of money on my hobby because I have the privilege to do so. But you can make something really wonderful for less than $25 and something that you can be really, really proud of. I like to mention that. I think it's important to mention that because I often show you only the expensive side of sewing here, so I wanted to just show you something a little bit more affordable today, especially considering everything in the world right now. Economically, it is quite challenging, so you can still sew on a budget, and I wanted to demonstrate that today. As far as labor hours, on this channel we talk about labor because clothing is always made by human hands, and there should be labor costs involved. We are modeled today to not think much about the people making our clothing, but there are people making our clothing and they deserve to make a living wage. I talk about a living wage here in Seattle, which is more expensive, and this is not a one-to-one comparison. But with that, I'll talk about how long it took me to make everything. For cutting, it took me an hour and a half. I feel like I'm just starting to take a lot longer to cut things out, and I don't know why that is. And then the actual like machine, ironing board, sewing, alternating, whatever. It was 5 hours, and then I hand sewed this for about an hour and a half, bringing us to a total of 8 hours to make this dress. And I am multiplying that by $35.39, which is the living wage here in Seattle. Of course, if you were to be a small business manufacturing, you would probably not choose a high cost of living like Seattle to manufacture if you were trying to pay a living wage. Multiplying that 8 by that $35.39, we get $283.12. That brings us to a grand total of, if I was to sell this dress, all my costs, I would have to charge $306.23. Of course, this dress is technically not worth that. Some of that is because of how little we have our clothing worth now due to the aforementioned lack of treating garment workers with decency and respect. I did, as always, do some research on what it would actually look like to buy this dress new. For fast fashion, this is your Shein, Temu's, all your brands like that are absolutely not using any sort of ethical manufacturing, not vetting, not doing any of that. I found this for $32. So I, at $23-ish, beat that price by almost $10. And something similar just means similar collar, buttons, like similar structural bits to it. Of course, it's not a one-for-one. And then mid-tier fashion, which is usually fast fashion still. These are your mall brands like your Madewell, your Free People, Nordstrom, like all of those, Nike. They've all been caught having human rights violations, and I found something similar for about $109. Again, I obviously beat this price. For slow fashion, these are brands that ethically source usually their fabrics as well as their manufacturing. I found something similar for about $150, although this was like a euro to dollar conversion, so everything's pretty up and down with that right now, so it could be more or less depending on the time. And again, this is something that is like similar in structure to what I made. And then last, I thought I would browse around, see what it's like vintage. 1950s dresses are definitely less expensive than they were a few years back, because this was one of the reasons I started sewing. But I feel like you could find something very similar for about $75 over on Etsy. But that wraps us up for our cost breakdown. I hope all this information was helpful, made you think a little bit about your clothing and how it's made and who is paying the price for it. Going on to the project itself, here she is. I like this dress. I have worn it. I wore it yesterday all day, so about 8 to 9 hours. I will say fitting for this one is a little bit less fantastic. I should have done the full bicep adjustment or something with the arms. The arms are a wee bit tight. The waist is also a wee bit tight, and then I think the armpit area is a little bit too loose. So something is a little off in the fit of this garment. However, I still really like this garment. Will this become one of my favorite wears? Probably not, and that's not really because of the cut. It's more the color. I like this fabric a lot. I like it with the buttons, but like something like this is often what I grab for in my closet. But this was a great way to make something that was a lot more affordable. Side zipper, I always forget, so I always go a little higher in the pit than the pattern calls for because I find it a lot easier to get in and out of the dress. However, in this case, I went a little bit too high, so it's actually almost too hard for me to grab the zipper. So that'll be something I remember for next time. I don't do side zips very often, and a lot of times when I do a side zip, it's a sleeveless, so it's like fully open on the side. So it's just a little bit different than something like this. So this is the first time I've done a side zip and something like this in a long time. I don't see myself continuing to use side zips like this, so I don't see this being a issue in the future, but it is something I wanted to know. In general, also, I shouldn't be doing side zips because while my mobility is a lot better right now than it was a year ago, realistically, I will probably not always have the mobility I have right now. Things are going to ebb and flow, and it is important I make clothing for my future self. And in the future, I would feel actually pretty confident putting a zipper into the pleats here. Now that I've done this already, I have some tricks that I've learned from, there was a pattern that I sewed a while back that had you actually insert a zipper into a pleat, and it had instructions for that, so I think I could manage that next time. Other thing that I would note is I feel like the shawl collar, the facing kind of would tend to pop out a little bit, or like, I don't know quite how to explain what the facing would do, but it's not my favorite, so I think I'll leave it for now, but I am debating going back. It's always really hard to figure out how to tack a facing properly when it's like this, because you want it to have the looseness to fold properly. Like, it looks really great on the hanger right now. I just found when I was wearing it, sometimes it would catch this edge here. So I don't know. I don't quite know the solve for that. I just know that that wasn't my favorite, and that was one of my concerns when I made the facing for this and the collar structure for this, is I know myself and I know the things that I like and I don't like, and I hate a facing that is all over the place. Also, I would note these are not the best sleeves I have ever set. I just wasn't in the mood to be super tedious about it, and I knew I would like this dress enough without being super tedious about it. And I also I know I should probably treat all materials equally, but because this was a much cheaper dress to make and was almost kind of closer to a wearable mock-up than anything else, I just didn't care as much while completing it. And I think it's important to like decide what level of effort and perfection you want to give a project. Just because you like can give a project an 100% perfection doesn't mean you have to, doesn't mean you have the spoons to, doesn't mean you're not valid for choosing to like do it less perfect a different time. Like, it's okay to just decide to put in different efforts to different projects. Yes, if this was a really expensive silk, I would have absolutely put in the effort to make it do what I wanted it to do. All sewing's valid, and you don't need to be perfect every single time you sew. I know I am never perfect pretty much anytime I sew. Butt pleats, I do love these. I think this is quite nice looking. It does, I think, honestly look a little bit better on the hanger, the pleating, than it does on me, just because it starts to like skew because bodies are real and move and do things. But yeah, I'll definitely use this pattern again, and I think this would really work a little bit better with a rayon. This did end up, like, the fabric choice didn't kill me on this project, but I definitely think a rayon would have been a little bit better. And I had constructed this really, really radically different than I construct most things, and it's a little bit too bad that I ended up doing that because putting in the side zip defeated the reason that I was making it so the sides were adjustable anyway. Overall, just won't do a side zip like this again. I will figure out how to move it on the back even if it's a little bit complicated. Now that I've done this sewing project, I would absolutely feel confident to do my next one like in this pattern on the back. Most of the times I have no problem moving the zipper to the back. I just get in my head when it comes to pleats, and next time I just need to remind myself that I just need to take the time and put the zipper in the back, because a side zip is rarely worth it for me if it isn't sleeveless. Like the green dress that I did a couple weeks back, it was really worth it for me to do the side zip because it was like a bigger opening and a bigger hole, and I also had the back completely open. Like it made a lot of sense on that garment. It didn't make sense for this garment for me. But all things considered, I do like this dress. Like I said, it's not going to be a #1 favorite in my wardrobe. Honestly, it was probably never going to be a favorite in my wardrobe with this fabric. This was really just a good space for me to experiment and try something new on a fairly low stake. That wraps up my thoughts on this project. Next up, I have the Hope Helps. I know that these are out of date and they're old sometimes, but I do think it's important to reflect on the wins in the past, because it's really easy to let that one win kind of float by and let all the bad news back in. So even though these are going to be dated by the time they come out, I still think they're important to celebrate. First thing to celebrate was the election of the Wisconsin judge that Elon Musk wasn't able to rig despite all of his millions and millions of dollars spent. It sent a very firm message that our government is not totally for sale. I think it's a really, really positive news for us in this country, as hopefully in a couple years we go into midterms and as all these other different special elections happen. It's what I try to remind you guys, like, it's not over. It's not over. There is still things worth fighting for. Voting is still worthwhile. We're still going to be voting, and to make sure to do all of that. And I think it was a really good sign that buying that election didn't work, because that should have been a relatively easy election for them to buy. So the fact they didn't is really, really phenomenal and worth celebrating. Another kind of dated thing, there was that protest that first week of April. I know this is not coming out till mid-May. I think there are a lot of really, really valid critiques about that protest out there. I'm not super gonna get into that because I think a lot of the critique is valid, but I also see things from a very different lens as someone who, my first protest and my first experience like really engaging in political activism was the Pink Pussy Hat March, where millions and millions of women turned out. That was my first ever protest, and that helped me start to step my feet in to being a more politically engaged and civically engaged person. I think there were issues with the April protest. There was definitely some lack of intersectionality and stuff that happened, but I think it got a lot of people out there protesting for the first time in their life. I think that's really positive. I think ultimately what's going to come out of it for years to come is going to be net positive. I know multiple people who their children of like late teens, early 20s. It was the first time their kids had gone out and marched and been active, and like I think that's really important. Also, most of what I heard about it, it was a lot of like older people, which I also think is really important to have those people engaged. I think it is ultimately a net positive. And again, I think it's so easy to like criticize and be cynical, but being cynical makes you not active and makes you not do anything because there's no reason to. So while I always will encourage us to think critically about things, I will also encourage us to find the bright side in things, because it's tough out there, and we're not going to make progress if we're beating ourselves up all the time, and if we're not able to find hope anywhere, which is why I have this whole corner for you guys. Another thing making me hopeful is the suit of Harvard towards Trump over research funding. They've also, I believe, threatened some suits over denying international visas for students. And overall, we've seen a ton of universities come together and unite against the Republican administration's policies, which I think is really, 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 really positive. But it's really, really good to see all of these schools. I think it was something like there's 10 that have like are talking about making like this like NATO like alliance between them, but also I think it's like 150 schools. Again, I will cite everything down below because you should not get your news from me. You should not get your news from random people on the internet. You should be checking your sources, but I will link it down below. But there was a letter sent from like 150 schools, and I think that is all really good. I think we need our academic institutions standing up. I mean, I think we need everybody standing up, but I think it's really important to see our academic institutions standing up for what is right. Especially as academic institutions are incredibly flawed and have just a lot of not great things happening on them. Seeing them stand for something is really great and really exciting. Last thing, I wanted to direct you to 2 accounts that talk about just positive things. These are 2 people who I look to and I go look up their accounts when I'm not feeling so hopeful, which like I want to say as someone doing these hope corners, it's not that I'm not scared. I am absolutely scared. I have fear. I am an autistic person. I am active in the queer community. I am absolutely afraid right now. And I have friends in places in this country that I love dearly who are not safe due to this Republican administration, these Republican policies. I always want to emphasize that this Hope Helps section, it's not about being ignorant, it's not about being blinded, but it's about choosing to find hope and joy so that way we can persist. And these 2 accounts have just helped me on when I've had days that I'm like, everything's bad. These 2 accounts have helped me kind of reground myself. The first one is It's the Garbage Queen. I'm going to try to link their link trees down below so you can follow them on whatever social media site is your social media site. She talks about good climate news almost every day. So these are wins for the climate, which we love to see, because with the Republican administration's policy, we are ignoring climate change, and we all know that we're going to pay the consequences for this, and it's really deeply frightening. So it's really great to have some wins every day for the environment. We love that. That's one. And then the other is Ariella Elm, who they are someone who highlights what Democrats are up to and the positive change and like actual change that Democrats are advocating for us and doing their jobs. And I think this is also a really helpful account. These are two accounts that, like I said, when I'm having a day where I'm just like, bleh, which I have those days quite often. I've said in earlier videos, I truly believe everybody is going to be touched negatively by this Republican administration. I see people in my life being touched negatively by it every single day. So these are for those moments. These are accounts that I go to when I'm just like, because they don't always come up in your feed. You know, all the algorithms don't always serve you what you need. Sometimes they serve you more and more doom scrolling because that'll keep you scrolling as opposed to a little like hope snack. And so these are two accounts that I look to when I am feeling a little bit hopeless. So I wanted to give you them so that way you can use those for those days that you're just having it a little bit harder to hope. But hopefully, as always, this segment was helpful for you all. I enjoy putting this on. This is always a good challenge for me to find things that are giving me hope, because there's definitely days that I start my list for this and I'm just like, ugh, this doesn't feel good right now. But then I read some news, I do some research, and I can always find something and someone out there driving change that makes me feel hopeful. That wraps this guy up. I hope you enjoyed this whole project. I will have another kind of more basic cotton day dress up next as well. I am in my busy travel season, so I'm trying to get some simple projects done. Honestly, some of my more simple projects have been my favorites to wear on the most regular basis. And I will see you next week. I actually think I am putting out a video every week until I take my month off in July. So hopefully you guys will enjoy all the videos and content I have coming out for you. As always, you can give this a thumbs up and comment down below. It really helps me in that good old algorithm. Please go out, support your small businesses too right now. Just want to give my small businesses a shout out. Your dollar there really makes a difference. So when you can spend your dollars at your small businesses, that money will actually stay in your local economy. Wow, I am so scattered. Yeah, if you're still here, I think you enjoyed me. Subscribe, stick around. I would love to have you. And then if you've been around a while and you feel like supporting me over on Patreon, I do have that. But with that, I think I will be saying goodbye. I will, like I said, see you guys next week at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Bye!